welcome everyone to the final presentation of the 2025 SDHistcon Second Front. Tonight we're going to be talking about how to use the Combat Commander Random Scenario Generator. My name is Patrick Pence. I am recording this, and for those of you who don't know me, I am the executive producer and chief talent coordinator for the YouTube channel Patrick's Tactics and Tutorials. But I'm also the lead promoter for the Combat Commander Ladder, which I see we've got some familiar faces in the room tonight that participate in the ladder, and at the end of the evening we will mention that again. I'll probably mention it a few times. If you could mute yourself, that would be great. Like I said, I'm recording this and it will be available on YouTube after, and I'm also going to provide the links to Kai, and Kai has mentioned that these will now occupy a place of prestige among the GMT website for Combat Commander. With that being said, let me introduce the lead developer and co-creator of the Combat Commander series. Kai Jensen is my partner in crime tonight because this is the second presentation we've done. Last year during Second Front, we did our 10 axioms of Combat Commander, so definitely I will link that. And of course, go back and watch that. That's always fun. And in January, we did the, at that point, upcoming Fighting Formations 29th Infantry Division. And I always love doing presentations with Kai because she does an amazing job of production and preparation, and all I have to do is basically follow her lead and come on in and do color commentary. We are going to do this in film strip form, just as we've done. Kai's done a wonderful presentation. I'm going to step through it when she says ding, of course. And Kai, with all of that being said, let me turn it over to you.
So welcome, and thank you for joining us. This is the ins and outs of how to get through the random scenario if you haven't used it before, and Patrick and I are also going to share some thoughts of how we approach some of those different decision points that you have to make. So to get us started, Patrick, ding, there we go. So most of the steps between Europe and Med and Pacific are either identical or very much the same. There are a few places where things get out of sequence, because we had some additional things to consider in terms of Pacific. So I've tried to call out in those cases where things kind of jump around a little bit for the Pacific module. But for the most part, they're pretty much the same. And for anyone, good grief, is there even anyone in here who hasn't played before? No. But for anyone who may watch this later, all of the die rolls that we're going to be talking about are going to be made Combat Commander style simply by flipping cards off your deck and looking at those cards to give you your die rolls. And that's the down here little indicator of where they are on the card. Ding!
And before we go on, I will always intersperse my little comments here, just to frame all of this. As Kai said, I can't imagine after 20 years there are folks who have not encountered Combat Commander in some way, shape, or form. Our goal tonight is really just to perhaps demystify or take away some of the barriers to entry or self-perceived barriers to entry to the RSG. And so she's going to go through the steps. They are very easy processes, but if we will have succeeded tonight if we get people to kind of swim out of the shallows into the deeper end of the pool, because personally I think that the RSG is a criminally underused resource within the Combat Commander series. You can make your own scenarios and you can have so much fun with that. If perhaps my enthusiasm for it shows through tonight, then I think we will have succeeded with that. So on to the next slide here.
Tack onto that too, for anyone who doesn't know, is that the game itself was designed and tested based on the RSG. We did not have scenarios when we started. In the first 300 and something play tests, I don't even remember the number anymore, but 300 plus play tests were all done using this RSG, and it produces an incredibly balanced scenario. We pitched the game to GMT as, hey, you've got 1 million games in a box. You've got an infinite number of games in this box because your scenarios will never come out twice the same because you always change your decisions. Gene told us, wisely, now looking back on it, that we had to have scenarios. And so that's the reason why you see scenarios in every package that we put out for Combat Commander, is because Gene insisted that players want them. And I was frankly stunned. So it seems to me backwards that people have played scenarios for years and are just now maybe approaching the RSG. Anyway, moving on. First couple of rolls that you're going to be making in the setup is out of your control. You're going to roll a die, and the system is going to tell you what you're going to be doing. So there's going to be charts and tables to look at. So you make a die roll to determine who chooses the map. You make a die roll to determine how the map is oriented. So these first couple of steps are all just very simple. Flip a card, look at your die roll, do the thing. Not really much thinking going on here. You do decide what map you will choose, and you just, talk it out with your partner and pick a map. But the next several steps from here on out are just based on die rolls to randomize. So it's randomizing nationalities, the year of the conflict, your troop quality, the objectives. You're not going to start making decisions other than the map choice until we get to step 5.
And this is where we get into some of the, while it may seem that you have very little agency on this, as Kai said, we have an embarrassment of riches really in the maps now, with all of the battle packs, each one of them usually coming with 5 or 6 maps in each one. So here we are 20 years removed, and we have up to 40 or 50 different map sheets that you can choose from. So if you and your opponent have something in mind and you want to experiment, by all means, you don't just have to reach your hand into the box and grab one. If a map speaks to you, if you want a lot of terrain or if you want no terrain, depending on what your skill level is and what your challenge level that you're trying to set for yourselves are, well, then go in and pick one. And that's true of a lot of the things that we're talking about here. Out of the process is a randomization, which is fine. But if there are some choices that you really want to do, if you say, I want to play this nationality versus this nationality, then you have every right to supersede and just skip whatever's in that step. Specifically to the battlefield, one of the notes that I had made was that in my personal experience, I always recommend that you just take a couple of minutes, really just more than 1 or 2 minutes is all you need to explore the map, look at the terrain features, and if you are thinking ahead to your potential posture, as we're going to get to in a few steps, depending on whether you're going to be the attacker or defender on a map, I have made, more than I care to admit, many mistakes in poor decision making on when you roll a die, you get to choose, as you see here, that hex will indicate that you could potentially have 2 different map sides to choose from. There are going to be better and worse decisions on which map edge you want to attack from or defend from. So don't just blindly grab one and say, I'll take the left side or whatever. Think about it, look at it. If there are hills in your way, if you're going to be the attacker, you may want to reduce the line of sight, such as it is, and you want to maybe improve on avenues of getting off map. So a lot of that is a factor, in addition to setup later on, that starts right here from the map.
These first couple of die rolls, and at one point, we had a coin flip. What the heck? I spotted that in the rules. I can't believe we did that. So you're just deciding who's playing which side. And like Patrick said, if you already have a preference, by all means, roll with that and skip this step. But otherwise, it's just make a die roll, look at a chart, and that'll tell you who's who, when you're fighting, that kind of thing. It's just going to walk you through. And I didn't write the rules out here literally, but if you look in the playbook, it does literally just walk you step by step through this process. And it's super quick to just jump in, start making those rolls. That's another thing. Some people think that the RSG takes a while to set up. It does take a few extra minutes, but not long at all. I think we were usually up and rolling in 10 to 15 minutes, and some of that is usually the table talk as well. Pacific here is a little bit different because of who is involved in the timelines. It's a little more restrictive because you were tied to simply Commonwealth during the early years, and then later in the war, it switched to more of a U.S. drive while the Britons were sidelined, and then kind of a mix towards the end.
And I think you had mentioned it in a previous slide. This process that we're going through here tonight is the revision or the revised version that came out in the Mediterranean playbook, right? And to add to this, even though we don't have it included here, the note I wanted to remind people is if you have access to the Resistance battle pack or box set, because I love playing Partisans so much, that one of the modifications that you can make that allows you, if you are a Russian, if you're assigned a Russian as the ally in certain year sets, you may convert that into a resistance or partisan side. So if given the opportunity, I certainly love to play those scrappy, untrained freedom fighters. So keep that in mind if you have access to that.
So next up is you get assigned your troop quality. And like everything else we've mentioned, if you've got a preference towards or away from one of these, you don't have to do the roll-up. But if you are, this is, again, just random, and it's based on troop quality for that year in general. We tried to make considerations for, the amount of training or lack of training for replacements late in the war, where all the experienced, well, not all, a lot of the experienced folks have been, eliminated or sent home wounded or whatever the case may be. And so you've got a lot of replacements that are bringing down the troop quality in some areas as tactics degraded, that kind of thing. So we tied a lot of that into what happens here. So it's not random per se, but your assignment of it certainly is. And you can see here in the graphic, as you're going through these steps, you're also getting instructions on where to mark things on the display track, on your player aids, have all this information. And so it's going to tell you, during this step, while you're doing this thing, find this marker, place it in whatever space. So you're going to be getting those instructions as you go through this as well. Objectives, just like games, your objectives come out of the cup. All three of them are going to be random, and some of them are simply open, like always. So you don't end up with a secret hidden one, and you just, same thing, follow the instructions. You draw it. If it says open, sorry, tough, and that's going to get accounted for in the opening VPs for both sides, if it's one of those that has an objective to it. If you're lucky, you get a secret one. And again, this just walks you right through the steps in the actual language of the booklet. I haven't written out the rules itself here. I'm assuming everyone can read for themselves, so I'm not just going to read you through all these pages. So at this point, we've done just a bunch of make a roll, do a thing, mark it somewhere on the board. From this point on, you're going to start making decisions. So you know what the objectives look like. You know the quality of your forces. You know what side you're playing, what year you're in. So that gives you kind of an idea of what possible support weaponry you might have available to you during the course of the scenario. So now, with all of that in place, we're going to start making some actual decisions. Ding.
This is the heart of it here. This is, as she said, this is where we start getting to a lot of player agency, and this is where the true metagame begins for the whole RSG.
And to be honest, as many games as I've played, this is where things start to break down for me, because I have to make these choices. And I would say probably a good third of my games, I have made a bad choice here and only discovered it later in the game. So we'll talk about some of the thinking points you should be going through, things to consider as you're making this decision here. But this is picking your actual forces. What do you want as you're available? But you still don't get to know who's on the attack, who's on the defense. So you're having to make these choices a little on the blind side. You don't know what you're going to stumble into. So you've looked at the map. You have a good idea of, what your terrain is, where you're approaching from. Are you going to have to possibly run the length of the map or make a defense in an area devoid of terrain and anything to shelter your troops? So how much or how little do you want? And then that choice is going to be affected by how much or how little your opponent has chosen to get you your final postures. So it's a little bit of a dance at this point. So my general rule of thumb, and this is certainly not good tactics, I'm sure. Everyone's going to have their own style, but my general rule of thumb is that the map is narrow. I will take a small to medium-sized force because there's less width to cover. And I could end up on defense that way, so depending on terrain. But a medium-sized force would be good for attacking if the other player happens to choose a smaller force than mine. I still have enough to get the job done. If the map is wide, I'll go medium to large, simply because there's so much ground to cover. I'm concerned about defending the edges in the case of a scenario where there's a good opportunity for exit for my opponent. Having said that, however, some of my more memorable games have come from just throwing that rule out the window and either going crazy small or as large as possible just to see what happens.
And this is where she and I were sharing notes on these slides, and this blew my mind because I had not thought of it this way. So when you encounter different thought processes for how you purchase your order of battle, it is going to vary so much. For me, I personally tend to play just a little more conservatively in my point expenditure because, as you see with that sliding scale, it goes back and forth. So for me, that is one of the major factors in my decision. So if I'm in line or green quality, I tend to be somewhere more in the detachment. So you can see this example here. She's got the U detachment there for which is the middle of the road. That's typically, you're not spending a huge amount of points. You're still controlling it, but it is not as big as a company, and it's certainly larger than just a platoon. If I'm in the elite quality, then I will usually go with smaller, a little more nimble platoons, which are on average about the same cost as their larger detachments of line or green quality. So you spend a little bit more, but they're smaller, they're very flexible. If I select a company, which is the first one there, the line, you are spending an exorbitant amount of points, but you're getting a lot of units, which to my mind is many, many more targets for your opponent to shoot at. And depending on which posture, as we will see later on, that could be good, that could be bad. You could be overwhelming them with a Russian human wave, or you could just have a lot of people standing around just acting as targets the whole time. So for me, I agonize over this quite a bit. And hearing the way Kai thinks about it with the orientation of the map and the terrain was certainly very refreshing for me to see a different perspective on it.
To say with most things you say, there's no wrong choice. I always come at this one with I'm never going to make the right choice. Okay, moving on to leaders. Again, your leader choice is a random die roll. If you've got somebody you absolutely want to use because you're testing a theory, or you just hate getting those guys with only one command, you do you. But if you're doing the die rolls, there's only a certain subset of leaders that you'll get. A lot of the other leaders will only ever appear then if you're playing by coming in on a support roll, if you get lucky enough to have one of those during the game. And if you end up rolling for the same guy twice, you just keep rolling until you get a leader who is actually still available. So every time you make the roll, you pull the guy out of the mix. And then by the time you're done rolling for X number of leaders you should have that many individual guys. So even if you're like me and you're going to roll 5, I've already got him, 5 again, already got him. It gets super annoying. Just keep rolling. Only takes a minute. So once you've got all your leaders, you know what your OB is, pull all your markers and counters, all the weapons and everything that come with them. Now is the point where you're going to pull stuff out and start making a pile. We're not going to set them up anywhere yet, but you want to have all these things pulled out because it gets a little confusing having to go back later and look.
And because, as she said, that this is it's just totally random. All you can hope for is that you've got enough positive modifiers, and I think the rule of thumb here, more or less, is the higher you roll, the better, because the more potent leaders are down towards the bottom in the 7+. They have higher defense, morale, and typically they're a 2 range, things like that. So higher is better, but hopefully you don't have too many negative modifiers that are going to keep pulling that away from the higher number.
Then if you've gotten to this point and we're pushing the VP marker back and forth as you're paying for things, if you're not on 0, then the person who's spent the least, so the marker's on their side, gets to make a support roll. You do it on your support table, just like you've been doing during games. You get to pick something that is era appropriate and add that to your OB. You are limited by the counter mix, so if you've already pulled out all of your weapon teams and their associated weapons, and you roll for that on here, obviously you're not going to be able to choose that item. And again, when you pull these out, you're going to be moving that VP marker and paying for that. So if you have spent enough that you've pushed that marker back over to the other side, your opponent's going to get to do this as well. So we're doing a little push-pull here, kind of dancing around that 0, hoping for whichever side you had planned on. Important note here, and I was reminded of this as I was doing research for setting this up, weapons gained during a support roll must be kept with their accompanying units. So as you pull them out, keep those together. Lone units that come in off a support roll cannot have an OB weapon assigned to them. So those also have to be kept separate. And I don't know If anybody, when you're in the heat of it and laying out all your units and stuff, if people actually remember that one. I was kind of surprised I had forgotten it.
That has absolutely caught me on more than one occasion. So, yeah, I try to very dutifully pull out the weapon team, pull out the heavy machine gun, put it aside. And that way they are stuck together and with the glue. For me, just like the order of battle, this is one of those moments in the whole RSU process where you can be very fortunate if you have a lot of potential points to spend here. You can buy multiples of the same weapon. Personally, I find that if given the opportunity, I find that at least one medium or heavy machine gun is essential, even though they have an encumbrance and they can weigh down the weapon team with them. But since we still don't know what our posture is, I find that having at least one is sufficient for whether you're on attack or defense. Also, controlling the ability to produce smoke is very fundamental for me with these support weapons. So regardless of what posture you end up on, and radios are not a guarantee, as we're going to see here, so I may have to rely completely on smoke grenades, or if we're in Pacific, the smoke screen. And if you want to enhance that capability for producing smoke on the battlefield for approach or defense or whatever you're doing, then you need to look at the opportunities here for smoke producing weapons if they are available to you. Some of the howitzers and things like that may produce it. All of this being said is the heart of this metagame, just like the order of battle, where these purchases are how close do you get back to zero or push it over, because that is going to be one of the final determinants of posture, as we're going to see in the next step. So be thinking about how much you want to push that marker. If you want to play chicken and try to get right to zero so that you're both in recon, that's a possibility. Or you want that really juicy, nice weapon and you push it over the line, over zero, and give it back to your opponent. Now there's a pretty good possibility that they will either get a weapon as well, or you're going to be stuck in the attack posture. You just don't know.
There's also a thing too here, depending on the map. I may be specifically looking to grab another leader if we've got a heavily wooded area or it's hilly and you've got, lack of line of sight to areas. You may want to pick up that extra leader just to be able to keep all those units moving or firing because you're on that wide map and things are a little more dispersed. So sometimes the map will inform for me whether I'm looking mostly at the top of that chart or if I'm just looking for whatever looks good with what else I've already chosen. But sometimes I'll be looking for picking up an extra leader just for the help. So now we're down to it.
The big moment, right?
The location of that VP marker is now telling you, who's on attack, who's on defense. Pacific's got a lot of two different additional postures. You got bonsai and you got invade, which are just a couple extra steps, a little more fiddly, I should say. So if the VP marker is at 0 for any scenario, you're at recon. For plus defender, for minus, you're on the attacker. But the invader posture, where does that come in? That's the one. If your map has a water edge to it, so beachfront, you're thinking, then you've got the opportunity to switch over to invader instead. And so that you have to rotate the map to put that beach edge facing the appropriate player, so you're coming in from off board. Otherwise, the different setup, Europe and Med versus Pacific, at this point they're the same. Bonsai is a definitive posture, so you simply select it. Everything else is just assigned.
I don't have any particular notes on this. It is my favorite part is to see did I control enough with my choices to affect the posture that I was hoping to play, or did a last minute purchase or something skew it, and now I'm in the totally unprepared attacker or recon posture. It really just depends, but it's always fun because it shouldn't be a surprise, and yet sometimes it is.
So we're going to continue spending VPs, but your posture is now set. So the defender gets to spend points up to the current value of where the VP marker sits. So if you got lucky and your opponent spent a ton of points, you're sitting on bank to build your fortifications with. Choices get a little more interesting because now you know the map terrain, you know the orientation, you know the opposing forces, their quality, the number of orders they can play. So all of this is known information at this point. you have, how much to defend with in terms of forces and weaponry. How much more do you need to hold your ground since you're on defense? So some of the things I consider looking at the map is there terrain where wire can be used to channel the enemy to my benefit, to deny them the best use of their heavy weapons, to slow their approach to a key objective? Am I lacking decent cover and could use a bunker or a pillbox for a forward position, or would foxholes be good enough to go with what else is on the map? And then, like I said, how much are you willing to spend? Is control of open objectives, is that going to help you redress the balance of those VPs that you're spending? You can already calculate the value because the defender claims all objectives. So whatever you know about objectives at this point, you can do the math and figure out, okay, I really have this much as soon as we account for those objectives. So even though you've got, maybe 5, 7, 8 points to spend, you've got more VPs already in the bank because of the objectives that you hold on to at the moment. So how much you spend now on fortifications can really factor into, I don't know how to say that. Do you know what I'm saying, Patrick?
Your overall, yes, your overall strategy, right? What can't you say about wire? I mean, I love as the defender going shopping, and 3 victory points for 10 wire. Boy, oh boy, that is a bargain and a half to me because, as Kai mentioned, you can channel your enemy down into kill zones. You can just block off key objective areas. You can prevent them from running willy nilly off the map. So I think the cost benefit there of getting wire cannot be overstated. And in addition, spending 1, 2, or 3 points for up to potentially 9 foxholes. A lot of the high ground that we were speaking of, if you've got a really nice high vantage point, it may or may not have woods or brush up on that hill. So having a foxhole there that you can place for a machine gun nest or a mortar a spotter, even just having that at your disposal as the defender really is key to your overall strategy, especially as the defender.
Yeah. Maps that, just because of the lack of terrain, even though it's expensive, I'll go all in on a minefield instead. That's not my go-to, but some maps are so wide open that I think that's actually kind of an overlooked opportunity in some cases, even though it's super expensive. Because, like I said, you already know your point value of the objectives that you've got. And sometimes that 9 points, 12 points to get yourself a nice hefty minefield setup is actually worth it. So don't skip over that little corner of the chart just because it's expensive. Stop and think about it for a minute at least and say, do I have all this open ground? Is it going to be hard to hold on to? Is this going to be worth spending the points then to hang on to the VPs for the objectives? From watching people roll up on RSG, a lot of us tend to skip that simply because of the cost associated with it. So something to bear in mind.
And that's how you earned the nickname Mayhem. Minefields everywhere, baby.
Absolutely. So now everything's kind of known at this point, except where are you? So defender gets to set up all their stuff, not their fortifications, just their units and weapons. Placement is based on the map orientation. So wide or narrow is going to tell you how deep into the field you get to set up. At this point for the Europe and Med, you also place the control markers. For Pacific, there's a couple of other steps that need to get done before that those actually get marked and paid for. No matter the map orientation, it's possible to get to set up, ready to rumble, pretty much adjacent to the enemy's setup area. So be careful how close you get, because that's going to give away time to the other player, because they get to just open right in their own neighborhood. You're right in range, and that's where they want you. So even though you can set up that deep, just keep an eye on the fact that you're going to be snuggling right up to it if you go too far. I tend to set up with an eye towards what I either know or perceive as to be the most valuable objective, my most defensible terrain, and the greatest distance to force the enemy across. I want to make them work for it. Because if they open with a hand of fire cards and I'm not in range, or I'm not in line of sight of them, that's a dead hand. And so I'm going to force them to discard and keep moving, which is to my advantage as the defender. I'm always looking for ways to buy time. So, sometimes a defense set up a little further back is something that I tend to look for, just to increase the pressure on an opponent who, hasn't either moved or advanced far enough to get their job done.
I often see players just setting up, as you say, ready to rumble, and right out of the gate, they've got no fire cards, and suddenly they're taking all kinds of fire because they're so danger close. So, as a defender, I often like to just let them expend all of that time coming to me so that I can prepare, craft that hand if I need to. So that's a little bit of the metagame. But to Kai's point about the most valuable objective, that is very arbitrary and fluid because we teach people on every map, just knowing what we know about the objective chits, that even in basic scenarios, pay attention to where objective number 5 is because it has the most potential of becoming a critical objective. Because if through a random objective draw you pull out the open objective, which makes objective 5 now worth 10 points, if you take it from the other person, it's worth 10 points, which means it's a 20-point swing, and that can be a backbreaker in any game of Combat Commander, but especially in an RSG where you start potentially right about the zero or within a few points of zero. So you always want to identify where that is on whatever map you're playing on. If you're the defender, you want to defend it like grim death. And if you're the attacker, just know that it may be worth nothing at the beginning, but it may be a sizable amount of points at some undetermined point of the game. I also personally like to, on every map, identify the avenues of exit with the minimal amount of terrain, especially if I'm on the attack posture, so that if I get a hand flush with movement cards, that I can lay a bunch of smoke and try to get units off the map, which a lot of Combat Commander players always forget. Leaving the map, that's worth a lot of points if you get a bunch of units going and leaders, and then they come back as reinforcements. So don't just get into a Sitzkrieg mentality where you set up and you're just going to sit in your foxholes, and that's one of the axioms we talked about last year. So in this process, be thinking about, okay, how can I get off the opposite side of the map with the minimal amount of lead coming my way?
I think is at either point when you're setting up, because the engagement is the exciting part. Everyone's flipping cards and looking for opportunities, and the events come up, and that's where the fun is. But as a defender, that's not what I'm looking for early game, I'll say that. So defender sets up, then the attacker gets their chance to set up. In the Europe and Med one, this is where you can make an asset request. If the attacker decides to choose on their support table, now they can attempt to get a radio, and again, paying the VP costs. So you're paying the cost back and forth this whole way through. So is it going to be worth the victory points given up for hopefully the benefit that you would get from that radio? Then attackers deploy, set up their units and markers on their side, and again, the orientation will dictate how deep or shallow you get to set up. And then, very important, I should probably stress this for Defender too, stacking restrictions must be observed during setup. There are occasionally scenario special rules that will break that, and Pacific is a little bit different with the stacking, but during setup, for all the games, stacking restrictions must be observed.
And I always come back to especially with the Europe and Med, take the shot at getting a radio. If you do, fantastic. And if you are fortunate enough, I believe many of the radios in Europe, I know the ones in Pacific, as you see here, do not, but the ones in Europe have the opportunity to provide a smoke barrage. So do take advantage of that, especially as the attacker, because if you just lay out a complete carpet or blanket of smoke, whatever you like, curtains of smoke, one, that's going to just choke up the area. Obviously, it's going to make you a little safer on your movement and approach, but it also, for each time advance, only one of those is going away unless somebody happens to pull a breeze event. So you can really cover the map with smoke just by getting this radio. It may cost you 4 or 5 victory points, but I heartily think it's worth it.
If it's a map that's not providing good lines of sight, then I tend not to go for the radio because you'll have less opportunity to use it, even though you still have to pay for it. So this is Pacific only. So coming in on that beach edge, then you've got to set up some of your guys on map, and the rest of them have to go to the time track. So this is completely different than Europe and Med because we didn't do any invasions on that. So you're only going to get a portion of your forces. So hopefully you thought about that when you were picking your guys to begin with. You knew what the map looked like before you started the whole thing. You got to consider a portion of your units are going to come out second wave, which means that you're going to have to push time as the attacker, which is a little antithetical. Normally, the defender is the one pushing time, but in order to get all your forces on board, you're going to want to flip on a lot of cards to push that time to get these guys in. So this makes this posture a little bit more difficult to manage, I think, for newer players until they really wrap their head around how the game works. So if you've gotten this far and you're a brand new player, best of luck to you, and this is why beach landings are hard.
I guess that explains why there was not an invasion or like a Normandy type beach landing map in Europe, right? Because it was just something that came out of the development later on, I would assume.
Yeah.
Yeah. It might be fun to go back and add some of those capabilities now, but I'm sure that that adds a whole new wrinkle to things.
I could probably do it through scenario special rules, but I wouldn't add it to the system as a whole.
Right.
No.
Right.
Yeah. Interesting now. So now, for Europe Med at least, the defender gets to purchase their fortifications. I think it happened early for Pacific. So now you get to set them up. Again, the orientation of the map makes a difference to it. Your units and markers, you obviously don't have to put units with the fortifications, and you, in the cases of mines and wires, you certainly wouldn't want to. But you're going to be trying to cover the areas that you want to channel your opponents away from and give yourself good cover in the areas where you know you can sit and snipe at the incoming opponents. Not much to say on this one, though. This is another one of those steps where I tend to do it all wrong, and I find out about halfway through the game that I've had a much better position to put something into and didn't do it.
One of the little tricks, little considerations is that remember that fortifications are one per hex. So if you pre-stage a wire or a mine into an objective hex, then you can clearly slow or trap an enemy or cause some grievous leg wounds when they're entering that objective as they try to capture them. And it also prevents them from subsequently putting a dig in at that location, unless of course they have sappers or demolition, something where they can remove that existing fortification. But that's a process. They've got to remove it, they've got to have the action card, they've got to do it, and then they've got to subsequently do a dig in there. So that's a lot of what if variables. Also remember that in Europe there is only one pillbox, and you can only place that on an objective hex. So if someone fires into that and you happen to have the defender and the pillbox, then you get one. In Pacific, you have any number of pillboxes, so you could potentially build them later during actions.
And then in the slightly unusual chance that you actually ended up on recon, because it's kind of almost a choice that happens, the player who's got the higher initiative, which was listed in their purchased OB, is going to be the one to set up first. And in this case, it's a feeling out force. Basically, nobody was set up in the area, so you're going to set up a little bit shallower and with a bit more of a gap between the forces, so you're not going to be able to set up nose to nose like you do in the other postures. But then the opposing player will set up, same distance from the other side. Again, stacking restrictions are in effect. And in this case, worth mentioning that marker stacking is also a thing. So there are maximum, for certain of the markers. And I think you already mentioned fortifications. Smoke won't stack. And I listed over in the corner, you can see, so Pacific has slightly different overstacking penalties, but stacking still during setup is restricted. So again, very similar choices to attack defense, but understanding that you could be in either position, depending on your opening card hand and just, how you decide to play out, since you're recon, are you going to be more aggressive? Are you going to try and just grab a couple of objectives and hold the ground? What is it you're looking for? And a lot of that's going to be based on what are the objectives that got drawn for your roll up.
And on many occasions, I certainly love playing in the recon posture, because if you are in that, as we saw in that support role, that person who is about to make a support purchase has all the power right there. So they can get you to 0, force the recon. Now both sides are dealing with 5-card hands, which is great. They're completely and totally balanced, but it also takes away the defender getting free points for the total number of time markers that you have. So I think Recon is clearly the most balanced play that you could do because it is net zero, it is zero sum here. I just think that is a strange duck. I mean, it's completely different than having the attacker defender. So getting used to and actually attempting to engage Combat Commander in recon play through the RSG is a whole different experience, and some really like it a lot.
I do. It also takes all those defender actions
Exactly.
out of play.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. Really changes the game. Okay, so this is back to those unusual Pacific postures that don't show up anywhere else. So Bonsai has their own setup, and some of their units can come in on the time track, just like the invaders do. In this case, it's a choice. Then this is where fortifications get set up for Pacific. It's a little later in the process. And then beach defenses, if you have an invader, then purchase fortifications can be placed out into any non-water hex not containing an enemy, which is why those fortifications had to wait. We couldn't set them up the same time period that we did for the Europe side. The invaders on the beach, now you can go ahead and set up a wire defense. You can set up a minefield, whatever, in their way, anywhere that they're not currently already set up. Kind of an ugly thing, and it's very effective. After all the setup is complete, if you're playing Pacific, the Japanese player can actually remove a number of their units from the map if they purchased Bonsai Force, and the weapons go with them. Those removed units go off to infiltration boxes for popping up later, very dastardly. And then Pacific has night and day posture for the RSG, which Europe we didn't have.
Yeah, I was pretty lean on thoughts on it because we're at the cosmetic setup part. You know, we're coming down to like, okay, here's all the units, and we've done our setup, and now it's just filling in all the little boxes, you know, on the information tracks and doing things.
Yeah. So this is the point where in Pacific you finally place those control markers and adjust VPs. They got done much earlier. In Europe, there were less things to consider, and so we hadn't thought about doing a Pacific module at the time that we designed the Europe and Med stuff, and didn't realize the timing issues were going to be a little bit different. So the pacing on setup for some of this stuff is a little bit different, but it all ends up getting done at some point before you sit down to play. So yeah, this is just markers going where they need to go. Mines, if you purchased a fortification OB, you'll mark the strength of them. So in case you get all excited in the middle of the game and forget, there's a marker for it. You set up your smoke and blaze cups. You've got sighting markers. The Japanese player can purchase them. Again, you're spending VPs, and those can get placed out around the map. I think this is the final item gets set up. There are no choices here for most of these markers and things. I do recommend that both players do the math on sudden death to make sure you get that right where that marker goes. Nothing's worse than playing a tight game and finding out you cheated yourself out of a possible extra turn just because you did bad math. Or you got forced to try and hang on one turn too long because one person did the math and the other person didn't check it. So that's one of those things that really makes a big difference in a game. I mean, you've all seen how tight games get, and you're just waiting for that next time check because you've held out long enough. And don't be the guy that blows the game because you didn't do the math. I think that's the only thing I had to add to this one. Yeah, well, and the thing is to remember, though, if you've played a lot of Europe and Med, for Pacific, that number gets adjusted. So you'll do that math, but for Pacific, the number's going to be adjusted up on a narrow map or down on a wide map.
That's true.
If you're not on Recon.
Yep.
And that's a step that people tend to forget if they've played a lot of one and not the other.
Exactly.
All right, and then cards. So the Holy Hand Grenade. So whoever's got the higher initiative by the time you get this point gets the card to start the game. Shuffle up. Your hand size is based on your posture. Always a great thing to have that lovely handful of 7. Never know what to do with 7 cards. You can't do that many things in a turn, but you get through the whole thing. You set it all up. You play your game. You get all the way to the end. You could set up and play again with the same RSG. You could just replay the whole thing, keep the same forces and switch sides, make a couple of adjustments maybe based on your deployment locations or where you put your fortifications. But it's an interesting way to take a second look at a situation that you've just played. If it came out really tight or some key factor, a little bit of luck somewhere, or a crazy event really tipped things one way or another, it's an interesting way to go back through that same scenario without having to go through the whole roll up again because you've already got all your forces out. And so maybe just sit down and play that one through again and see how different it looks from the other side of the map, or with different events and things that happen during the course.
Totally second this. I think all the experience I've had, for the most part, every RSG creation we've done, we will play them back to back. And as you said, this allows for creative play variations by the different opponents, the different setups, and this is critically essential if you're developing this as a scenario for tournament play, or if you're going to develop perhaps a series of campaign scenarios to put together for maybe submitting to GMT or whatever, before you start. And people always want to immediately create this, play test it a couple times, and then they start tinkering it with special rules and SSRs and things like that. And totally, that's encouraged and everything, but you need to make sure that you test each one of those and say, oh, okay, now I'm going to add dusk to it, and I'm going to add an inherent hindrance to everything. So how does that break the game? Does it make it better? So just right out of the gate here with the RSG, play each scenario twice and then see how you do it versus the other person does it with all of the variables preset, and the only difference being what you encounter in game and of course the setup that you've done. And you will identify issues or imbalances that will appear because of the map or just because your setup was completely different from my setup. I can't stress that enough. Play it twice. You know, you did it. Might as well do it twice. And I think this leads us into, we certainly have plenty of time here, final questions. And our hope was we had enough audience members out there that had some previous experience with this that wanted to share, and we could have a roundtable discussion, things that we did not mention or did not think of. One concept or one thing that I wanted to put out there, and Kai reinforced this, was that this is a good time for you to all become somewhat familiar with this, because as we have learned that in the Combat Commander Vietnam product that will be coming out, that the RSG is going to be a significant part of this, and in addition to that, the random campaign generator. So and a different as well. So you're putting together a large scale campaign with individual scenarios. All of that is probably going to use a very similar process of point buys and moving the victory point marker back and forth. So if you've spent 20 years avoiding the RSG, now is probably a good chance to just get in there and get your hands dirty and try to figure it out and make sure it works for you. But with that being said, Kai, do you have any final thoughts? And then we'll open it up to everybody.
We covered it all. I hear what folks have to say.
Have we? Good. Okay. Well, is there anyone out there that's brave enough on recording here to lend your voice to become famous on this? Share your experiences with the RSG. And if not, that's okay too, but we would love to hear it.
Well, I'll jump in. I'm one of the people that has avoided the RSG because I really just couldn't grasp the concept, and seeing it walk through this way, I'm now encouraged to take it on and give it a try.
Excellent.
Yeah, that's what we want to hear. If you have somebody that you play with on a regular basis, this is a wonderful exercise to just kind of sit there and see how their brain works on the metagame. I had a guy locally in our group, he was one of our grizzled grognards, who swore up and down that after 10 or 15 plays of the RSG that if you always bought a company, you were always going to win. And I played with him a couple times, and I let him buy the company at the RSG, and I bought a detachment, and I smoked him a couple of times. So just throwing a lot of points and getting a lot of people does not necessarily mean that you're going to win. Keep that in mind.
That is true. And it's not intimidating. Once you've played the game, I mean, you guys have all played the game at this point, I'm sure, who are the guys in the room here. So you're familiar with the system. The RSG just walks you through step by step of what you're doing. So it's not a scary process, and everything is spelled out for you in the book. So you just read the paragraph, do the thing. You know, a lot of times it's just a card flip and it tells you what that result is, or it tells you got a choice to make. But it's actually really, if you break it down step by step, super simple to do, doesn't take very much time, and I think leads to some of the most balanced play in Combat Commander that you can get. So I highly encourage anyone who hasn't tried it, grab a friend and give it a whirl.
Seconded here. And if there's nothing else, then I want to thank everyone for being here, and Harold, as always, for inviting us to participate in the second front once again in 2025. And of course, thank you very much, Kai, for doing all the heavy lifting and the preparation for this. And I get partial credit for it, but it's always nice to have somebody that is going to bring such fine production quality to this. So thank you for that. And I would be remiss if I did not remind everybody that we would love to have you join the Combat Commander Ladder. I will have a link in the video description after I post this onto YouTube, and I will also put it into the text channel here. But if you've been wanting a regular opportunity to play Combat Commander with a wonderful community of players, then look no further. We will love to have you join us. We've got 100 players on the active roster, and we're just having a ball every month. And we're 8 years into it now, and it's just getting better and better as we go along. So if you need the opportunity, we will provide the opportunity. And I will give you the final words, Kai.
Oh, I just want to thank those of you who dropped in. I'm hoping that the words that were on screen helped out a lot more than my rambling, because I always get nervous doing these things. But, like I said, probably 8 times by now? If you haven't tried it, by all means, jump in, give it a shot. Vassal Ladder, same thing. If you've been thinking about it and haven't done it, I finally made the plunge, several months ago, and I've been having a blast. Highly recommend that as well. And thank you, Patrick, for doing all the technical stuff on this.
Of course. I'm in IT. That's what I do. We will see you all, I'm sure, at the next winter quarters. For those of you, maybe one day I will make it out to the November SDHistcon in San Diego. I'm hoping. But otherwise, we will see you, I'm sure, at the next online event. And thank you, everyone, for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you, Pat and Kai. Great presentation.
And here's a little postscript, because of course I forgot to mention this. One of the other little opportunities that you have using the Combat Commander Random Scenario Generator is a fine little tool that is an extension for the Vassal module for Combat Commander. And it is the Random Scenario Generator button here. And as you can see, I have taken the opportunity to press the button one time, and it will generate all of the basic information to set up the choices that we saw in the first several steps of step 1 through 3, and it gets you all ready. The map has been prepared because you've selected it, and then it immediately sets the year, the particular player who's playing Axis versus Allies, and what the quality of troops will be for the 2 players. And then from that point on, you just resume with step 4, drawing your objectives, and then proceed on through the order of battle and all the other steps that we talked about. But this is a wonderful, quick, and easy way to get you started. If you're just pained with indecision and you don't know what to select, you can just press that. As you can see here, I'll press it a couple times. It generates a new one. Now we're going to be using board 62, and it's 1943, etc., etc. I press it another time. Now I've got board 27, and the year's 1944, Germany versus Britain. So with just a single mouse click, I can do all of that, have that prepared for me, and then proceed on with the normal aspects of the RSG metagame that we've shown you. So sorry to have forgotten that in the actual presentation, but we hope that you'll find this useful as well.